Hello everyone and welcome to this new tutorial. In this video we are going to talk about a great technique both for beginners and advanced painters. I'm talking about the monochromatic underpainting, also known as dead color painting or grisaille. The word grisaille comes from the French gris, meaning that it's a grey painting. Throughout the history of art, the grisaille has mostly been used as an underpainting, usually followed by layers of full color and glazes. Traditionally, the grisaille was also widely used as an educational technique for students. However, the grisaille itself can have an interesting look, just like black and white photography, and you can find a few examples of paintings meant to be finished grisailles. Not very common, but it exists. Alright, so let's just start with the demonstration now. 1. Drawing with paint. The grisaille is the ideal transition between drawing and painting. If you draw with charcoal and white chalk on toned paper especially, you'll feel at home right away. Here's how the first stages of the grisaille go. First, to get a nice warm background, I create a wash of odorless mineral spirits and raw umber. This background tone is going to work as a mid-tone onto which I will later add highlights with white and shadows with black. We'll talk about this later, but first I start by blocking in the main lines. Right here it's very simple. I just mix half raw umber and half ivory black, and I take a little bit of it with the tip of a brush and simply draw with it as if it was some sort of a charcoal stick, very diluted with mineral spirits. Of course, you don't have to draw with your paintbrush. It's perfectly reasonable to trace an outline with some type of colored pencil and then fill in the empty space. If you prefer this approach, that's perfectly fine. I always recommend a process that works for you. And if you have never watched my video reviewing 5 different ways to start an oil painting, you might want to have a look. However, the grisaille is the perfect opportunity to learn how to draw with paint. I start with very thick yet light lines. I use the largest brush I can find and I keep the paint thin and diluted. At this point, I'm not looking for precision. I'm only trying to find dynamic lines to place the face within the space of the canvas. Once I'm rather happy with the placement, I start using less solvent and pick up more paint with the tip of my brush. This will help me create darker, less diluted lines. I use those lines to try to be more descriptive and start blocking in the portrait. Before we move on, if you want to learn more about various painting techniques, including the grisaille technique, you can check out my oil painting course. You'll find a link in the description box. This course covers everything there is to know about oil painting. It's very technical and detailed, and the idea is to review all the various options at your disposal so that you can come up with the oil painting process that's right for you. I have received great reviews, so I'm very proud of it, and if you want to learn about oil painting, I'm sure that can help you a lot. Alright, so let's go back to the video now. Okay, so at this point, not really happy with how it's going on, I decide to simply wipe it all off and start over. I keep the general placement of the head, but I will start again from scratch for the features of the face. I start with a few lines for the placement of the nose and the mouth, but very quickly I switch from 2D mode to 3D and start working with shadow shapes. Lines are great to conceptualize and anchor the composition, but to create realistic looking faces and figures, it's necessary to visualize them in 3 dimensions using lights and shadows. That's what I try to do now, focusing on shadow shapes with big brushes. There are some precise points and lines in those big masses of value, like the eye line for example, but for the moment I don't need to worry too much about them. As long as they are engulfed in the shadow shapes, they will find their exact position later on. So no need to rush and try to be super precise early on. It's very important to work from big to small, from rough to precise, and not the other way around. 2. Why paint a grisaille? Now, the actual grisaille can restart, as I will add some titanium white paint. Up until this point during the drawing phase, white wasn't really needed, but a grisaille requires the use of white paint. Otherwise, if you stop at this point, it is simply called a wash. And you can perfectly decide to use only a wash, and to be honest, if you complement this technique with some dry brushing, you can build a pretty elaborate underpainting without using any white paint. It's very similar to drawing with charcoal on white paper, meaning that the light areas are only created by the white of the canvas showing through without adding any white pigment. Now that we have a little bit of time, let's consider this. Why would you want to use this technique? Why not stop after the wash and the painting? And why not paint with the full range of colors directly after that, right? Of course, you can, but there are many benefits to using a grisaille. Number one, it's a true underpainting. While a wash is more like a light, diluted drawing, a grisaille is a true paint layer. It has a real paint texture, a real paint thickness that a simple light wash doesn't have. This allows to create a better rendition of the form, values, and volumes. 2. It's simple. The first great thing about a grisaille is that it feels like turning something complex into something super simple. Feels like drawing with paint, which is exactly the type of thing that you need if you just start painting. Understanding how to control the brush, how to use the fluidity of the paint is already super complicated, so if you don't have to worry about color, then your brain can truly focus on controlling paint, and really you learn so much better this way. It's like your brain is focusing on only one thing. 3. It doesn't require a lot of paint. For a grisaille like the one I'm going to paint right now, you only need 3 very simple paints: titanium white, raw umber, and ivory black. You can make it even simpler by using only 2, but the good thing about this triptych of pigments is that you can play with warm and cool undertones and create various nuances. The raw umber is a brown, yellowish, fast-drying pigment that's going to provide warm undertones. 4. It doesn't require a lot of medium. A grisaille is usually the bottom layer of a painting, which means, if you know the fat of lean rule, that it has to be lean. So no need to add any oil or any medium containing oil. If you want, you can dip the very tip of your brush in a small quantity of paint thinner, but even that is not necessary. You can use medium if you want. However, make sure that you don't make the bottom layer of your painting too fat, meaning don't add too much oil in it, because you want to follow the fat over lean rule, and this layer has to be lean, which means that it needs to contain very little oil. Painting a grisaille without medium is, in my opinion, a great way to get the best feeling with your paint straight from the tube. Learn how each pigment behaves, how thick and sticky they naturally are. You can learn so much by avoiding medium for the bottom layer, like playing the piano without using the sustain pedal. It's worth considering. Now, of course, for the second layer, after you let this one dry, remember to add a little bit of medium to make this second layer a little bit fatter, and then as the painting progresses, add a small amount of oil for each new layer to respect the fat over lean principle. And the greatest benefit is working with multiple layers. Working wet on dry is a real benefit. This means that you have more time to build your painting little by little, one layer at a time. And this can be great if you begin and you're afraid to make mistakes, or if you want to paint a particularly complex project. The real strength of the grisaille technique is that it is entirely based on values, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I'm always repeating it. Values are the foundations of realistic painting. You can see in this demonstration how I slowly start to incorporate values into the picture, first adding white in the highlights. At the moment, I'm using very little paint, adding matter very slowly, little by little, correcting the shapes at the same time. If you struggle with values, you can create a premixed scale of 6 to 9 values from black to white, or you can simply divide your palette into 3, white, midtones, and black, and you mix gradually between the 3 pools of values. I suggest that you mix raw umber and ivory black in equal parts to get a rather neutral gray, not too cool, not too warm, but feel free to use warm and cool at your convenience. Technically, it doesn't change anything to the values. Your grisaille will look more bluish if you add more ivory black, and will also take longer to dry, and will look more brown if you add more raw umber, and it will dry faster. Whatever you choose, the most important is to get the values right. Try to work from dark to light. It's easier that way. Take your time and really use this stage to refine the shapes as well. You have to push paint around until the shapes are all looking right. Don't hesitate to put the eye socket lower or higher if you need to. Make the nose wider or narrower, whatever needs to be done. This phase of the painting feels less like drawing and more like modeling with clay, actually. You push on one side with your brush and see the effect, and if it's too much, you push on the other side, you add more paint and make the paste thicker progressively, little by little, to slowly build the volume. I think that this analogy can really help you understand how to build the values little by little. Just think about placing little bits of soft clay on a figure, then spreading it around and blending it with the volume of the subject. 4. Volume and blending. Now that the values are in place, I need to refine the transitions, correct the shapes, and work on refining the form. My focus is now on edges. When edges look correct, I can also work on texture, like the texture of the eyebrows or the beard, for example, making sure that the skin is showing through, that it's not too cut off from the rest of the face. Since this layer is supposed to be covered later, it's up to you to decide how far you want to push it. It all depends on what kind of subsequent layers you have in mind. If you want to bring color with glazes only, then it might be a good idea to add texture now, because glazes are so thin that they have no texture. This grisaille underpainting can also be covered with a regular opaque layer, and in this case, texture can be added later. Whatever you choose, you have to focus on the overall volume, making sure that the painting looks three-dimensional. It's a lot easier to do so with a grisaille, and if volume is something that you struggle with, it's definitely a technique that you might want to consider. You can also see how even at this stage, I continue modeling the features of the face to make them more accurate. And I generally keep the eyes for later, as they are the trickiest part to paint. And the idea is to keep a rough shadow shape or a few temporary lines and avoid details for as long as possible, and to only describe the eyes when all the other elements of the face are in place. Still, with this idea of modeling in mind, I like to keep the eyes for the end. 5. After the grisaille. So what comes after? You're going to wait for this underpainting to dry, and then what's next? Really, it's up to you to decide. And there are many possibilities at this point. If you like the aesthetics of the grisaille, the black and white look, you can decide to stop here and leave it as it is. If you like glazes, you can also decide to bring color with thin glazes later, using the properties of transparent paint to reveal the volume of the grisaille underneath. If you want, you can also add normal opaque layers with full colors later. You might think that in this case the grisaille was not really useful if we are going to cover it with opaque paint. Well, not really. First of all, the full color layer will be so much easier to paint, even if it's opaque. This next step with the full range of color will be easier because you will not have to worry about values and volume anymore. The only thing to worry about will be hue and chroma. Basically, every shape, every value will already have a place within the space of the painting, and you will only have to fill in with color. It's almost like making 50% of the work during the grisaille stage, and the remaining 50% with colors. You save yourself the effort of making everything at once and struggling with everything at the same time. Like building the skeleton with the drawing, then adding the flesh with the grisaille, to finally finish with the skin with the full range of colors in the end. In my case, this is probably what I'll be doing. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a like and let me know if you'd like to see part 2 with the colors. That's going to be it for this video. If you like it, remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to support the channel. Again, a huge thank you to all my Patreon members, and this video wouldn't be possible without your support. If you want, you can join the community. You'll find a link in the description below as always. You'll also find the link to my courses, my oil painting course and my color course. Alright, so that's it for today. As always, have fun painting and joy and inspiration to you. Bye.